So he sat me down for the first time, seriously explained it to me. He said, whatever you are and whatever you might want to be, that is the best version of you. So you drop stuff around, you are a clumsy and you're a klutz, but it's you. And that's what makes you special. Why would you ever want to fit into some glass slipper? Let's fight together. And I was like, I didn't understand that. At 9, I think I understood it at 15 when I knew what a glass ceiling was. Because he said, you don't want to fit into a glass slipper that someone has made for you, that you need to fit into. You break the glass ceiling. And at 15, I was like, whoa, that's
दरवाजा
what
नहीं
that
बंद
meant.
कर
Until then, I was like, where's the glass ceiling? But it exists in such a big way, and that really shaped me. So, like, things like that about my parents coming from a country like that really shaped who I was.
Clearly, and I spoke to my mother, who lives in Manhattan, and I said, Mama, I'm going to do this panel with Priyanka. And the first thing she said to me was, tell Priyanka to get married and settle down. The only thing she asked me to pass on to.
If any of
Hello
you know
guys.
any single men that you want to set Priyanka, we'll put a board outside and you can just start.
And if I stayed on the phone for 2 more
petition.
minutes,
Oh, yeah,
if I stayed on the phone for 2 more minutes, she'd have recommended 5 guys that she found and stuff.
I need a weapon. But clearly, culturally, there are these defining moments and expectations that even when you are encouraged to think bigger and beyond, there are these moments such as marriage that are defining.
I feel like it's really not just a cultural thing. I think women, like, think about it. All the fairy tales we've always read end when the princess gets married. Why is there no story beyond that? That's the end of her life. Is, oh my God, she got the princess, she's married.
That's the next role you're gonna play. There we
क्या
go.
कर
We've got
रहे
your
हो
next movie.
After she gets married, what happens?
But I think that brings up a good point just around these cultural narratives. But you mentioned the words
कहाँ
sort of
पर कुछ
courage and conviction, and Indra, you talked a lot about it as
पहाड़
well in terms of finding your passion. I was really struck about your journey to this country because you asked your parents for permission to study in America, and they were so sure that you wouldn't get a scholarship that they said yes. And your ambitions that you didn't see at home that you wanted to pursue in a way that many would see as very scary, and that unknown.
That's first of all, we are a few generations apart. Okay, she's as old as one of my kids. So let's just be clear here. When I grew up in India, we had no TV, we had no cell phones.
Awesome.
No internet, of course. Going to the movie theater was like the biggest adventure for the family. I mean, we planned months in advance to go see Sound of Music. Okay.
Help.
So life was very different. I mean, life was about going to school, coming home, studying, playing in the
बंद कर दे
garden
यार
of the
भैया
house, going back into the house. So it was a very simple, uncomplicated life. Going to business school in India, studying in India, was again uncomplicated because life didn't have as many
अब कब
distractions and as much of the social upheavals that my kids seem to be having in New York City today. So given that, when I went to them and I said, I want to go to the States because everything we read about America was, this was the dream country. Everybody was dreaming for a slice of Americana. Students who graduated from the best schools in India wanted to come to the United States because this was the best. The colleges were the best, the universities were the best, life here was spectacular. So you sort of get caught up in that whole spirit. And when I applied and got into Yale, my parents were so sure I wouldn't get any scholarship money. They said, of course you can go. And then when the scholarship and loan money came by, and they were sort of in a dilemma. How do we send this young girl off to the States who's unmarried? Because once she goes unmarried, she's not marriageable at all. Nobody will marry her because she's now gone alone to the States. So there was a big family meeting. Everybody got together. Should we send her or not? I was going. But then, should we send her?
You let them have their moment.
Oh, sure, sure. The whole family had its meeting, and then they did something very interesting. They contacted all the friends of ours who'd already come to the United States and told all of them that they had to check up on me. So every week I have somebody come to here to check up on me. Is she all right? Is she running around inside? Is she drinking, smoking?
Were you? Were you?
No, I was the biggest nerd
is
at
this something you
Yale.
don't know?
God help. I didn't make good use of my time at Yale. Let's put it that way. And so I was a total nerd. But when they ticked off all the boxes, they said, okay, you can go to set up a support system for me. And then the rest is history. That was 40 years ago.
So you had this ambition to come to the States. Priyanka, you have a different relationship coming here. You came to the States in your teens to live with family, ultimately returned to India. I read there was a bully that was one of the motivating. There was one person, right? We won't name names, but if you want to name names.
I've named her on TV before. Spare her.
But one young woman helped shape your return back to India. But you had a really interesting trajectory since then. You planned to become an aeronautical engineer, but you ended up being Miss World, and along came the Bollywood producers and persuaded you to start acting to the point where you had 50 movies under your belt, and one of the most, if not most famous celebrities in India, the second largest country in this world. I mean, unbelievable success. And you came to the U.S. at the apex of your career, at least in terms of your professional career having been built in India. And I'd like you to reflect a little bit. What was it like coming here, not necessarily having to start over, but having to prove yourself in a different way when people often didn't even understand the industry that you were coming from?
Got it.
Yes, that was my relationship with the United States is very interesting because my adolescent years were spent here, and you know how important 12 to 16 is for just a human being and to shape them. So I kind of became an amalgamation of the East and the West wherever I went after that. So when I came back to America, I was doing music. I was signed as a recording artist with Interscope, and I came in to do. I'm a fan of music. I love everything music. So I was having the best time of my life. But I'm also not someone who's entitled. I've always achieved everything that I have on my own. I did not have advisors. I started working when I was 17 years old. My parents were physicians. They had no idea of entertainment. My dad just loved music, but that's all we knew. And to navigate the business of entertainment and to navigate being a young girl, in the big bad world of entertainment, and now with all the conversations that are happening, you guys know it's not the easiest thing. So, but I was never entitled. So when I came to America this time around, which was at like 27, 28, I was not afraid to walk into a room and introduce myself. I would walk into a room and I would say, yes, my name is Priyanka Chopra. You may not know me. I'm an actor from India. I've done about 50-something movies. But I'm also someone who's not defined by my ethnicity or where I come from. I'm a woman. I'm an actor. I'm an artist. And I'd like to see where that takes me. So entitlement, even now, is not something that I hold. And I expect, like whenever I walk into the room, I don't expect each and every one of you to know me at all. I've worked in a completely different country, in a completely different continent, which doesn't mean that you need to know about it. Like when I go back to India, I remember I was at the Oscars the first time when I went 2 years ago, and I was presenting.
I love it. When I was at the Oscars, right? It's like,
What is an important part of the story?
I love to know, but I love that so like nonchalantly. I love it. Yeah.
I was presenting with Leah Schreiber, and after we presented, we were backstage because there was a segment going on. So we were standing at the bar, and like some people who had won were coming in, and Leah was like, "Oh my God, that's the most amazing movie, and this guy has done blah blah movie," and I was like, "Oh," not trying to be ignorant, but I was, and I was like, "I didn't know him." He's like, "What? You didn't know him?" I was like, yeah, because I sort of grew up in another country. My name is celebrity from my country. And he was like, oh, I get it. But that's exactly what it is. I know American music and movies and because I came back to India, but I don't know all kinds of pop culture. But I had to learn. Like when I came in and I started doing Conoco, which was, I mean, ABC network TV, a character girl who plays, a character that I play, which is an American girl. She's not Indian. And I had to be culturally sound. Like I needed to speak like her. I needed to, crack jokes like her. Pop culture. I needed to know pop culture like her, which I didn't. There were lines which would come in. I still remember this one line where, and it's horrible because now I know her so well, but when I first landed, I didn't know her. And I got so much shit from my co-actors for it. There was a line which said, yeah, even Ronda Rousey loses sometimes. And I was like, who's she? And my co-actor Johanna Brady, who was most of the time my pop culture teacher, would turn around and be like, she would whisper it in my ear, and then I would pretend like I knew her because I didn't want to sound stupid. But I had to learn. I wasn't entitled about it, and I think that really took me in a different direction this time around.
So being confident, not entitled, and so and Indra, I feel like that's been a thread that's been present in your career, because so often, you have been the only woman in the room, and you talked about earlier in your career when you would go into meetings with men and they wouldn't look at you or they would double check your numbers, and yet it seemed that you had this sense of confidence to in yourself or your work that allowed you to navigate those obstacles. And when you were named appointed CEO, you had said that that there were unique challenges that you faced, right? Being a woman of color, being a first within your industry. Talk a little bit about how you navigated that and where you drew from to have the anchor in these challenges.
Look, in my early days working in corporate America, I never really fit in because I dressed differently. I didn't have money to have good clothes. So I'd buy two suits, a black suit and a beige suit, and I'd make four suits out of it. I'd mix and match them. And the fifth day, I always worried about, what am I going to do? Am I going to repeat the cycle? When they gave me dressing instructions,
Did you worry about fitting in?
I worried about how I was perceived because I was the only woman, right? Already walking in, I looked different. I didn't want my clothes also to give people some sort of a sartorial seizure. So it was one of the things where I knew I didn't dress very well because I'd look at the other women and say, wow, how do they pull it off so beautifully coiffed and they look so well put together? Why do I look always a black suit, beige suit, white blouse? Always the same. I decided after a while that I'm never going to win the looks battle. So I'm going to focus on this is the brains part. So I focused on doing a job better than anybody else could do it. So pretty soon, we only want Indra on the assignment, Indra on the job, because they got very comfortable that if you gave it to her, gave it to me, it will get done. Not just get done, it'll get done exceedingly well. So I started to depend more and more on my brains and my hard work, how I looked or how I talked or how I made comments in meetings. That comes in the package. So think of me not as a complete package, but as a brain wrapped in ways. So that's the only way I can justify myself.
So brains was your common language, right?
That's it. I said that's all you're going to
But did you
justify.
have to work harder than everyone else in the room?
At the time that I started to work in when I graduated from business school in 1980 in the United States, I think all women had to work about 50% harder than men. I think today it's about 20%. It's still got to work harder than the men. But when I started, it was 50% harder than men. And being somebody of different ethnicity, different way of dressing, I had 50 plus. At least that's my perception. Nobody gave me this number. I'm just throwing out these numbers, but there is no
You're a
scientific
pretty smart
study.
woman. I feel like it's
That's how it felt at that time.
Yeah.
That's how it felt. And so, in a way, the fact that I had to fight for everything just made me a better person. But in retrospect, there were a lot of trade-offs one had to make because you had needed time to do things so well. So it came out of some other bucket.
And I want to talk about those trade-offs in a little bit because I think so often,
Good luck, mates.
we look at successful women, and particularly because there aren't that many in the respective arenas, and we look at wonderful. There is a backstory, there's hard work, trade-off, and sacrifice, and there's never a smooth ascendancy to the top. So I want to switch gears and talk about one or two of the defining struggles in your careers that were formative in bringing to where you are today, the ones that stung the most and that were the most painful, and potentially if you're living them in the public eye. Priyanka, I loved a quote that you said, I don't believe that you can sit and wish for something and it'll happen. The soles of your feet have to be blistered. There's no pretty picture of hard work. There's no success story that doesn't have shadows of pain, doubt, fear, lack of sleep, and illness. But when you step out of the light, step out in the light, all that gets hidden, and the effort and the struggle gets hidden. The path is not easy for any success story. So when you think about the perception versus the reality, can you share one or two of those setbacks or those moments that were blistering, that were so critical to allowing you to achieve what you've achieved?
A couple of times, many times through my career. My career now is about 18 years old, and I think when I first started, and I started with being Miss World. I won a beauty pageant, and then I had movie offers that came to me because obviously producers thought it made business sense to cast Miss World in a movie because they wanted. But the first thing that came with that was like I still remember there was this. So Indian movies have songs and dances, right? So there was this one song which, um, obviously, I played the escort in the in the
Get in the
movie
car.
because that's what pretty girls do. But I was supposed to be this escort, and in the song I was
Get
supposed
in
to
the car.
be like seductive towards this guy. And I was very excited about it. It was one of my first few movies with a really big, ginormous Indian actor, and I was really excited about bringing in the aspect, the human side of this escort. And I remember this song, and I was speaking to the director, and I said, "Would you speak to my stylist and just explain to him what you want in terms of clothes and stuff?" I'm standing right next to him, like behind him. He's sitting on his chair, in that really entitled way. And he picks up the phone and he goes, "Listen, people are going to come into the movies to watch her when she shows her panties. So it needs to be really short so that I can see her panties. You know, those people sitting up front, they should be able to see her panties." And he said it like 4 times. And it's not even pretty in Hindi, it's worse. Um, and I'm 18 years old, 19, and I'd shot 2 days for that movie, I remember. And I went back home that night and I said, "Mom, I can't look at his face. I mean, if that's what he thinks of me, if that's how small I am, there's no space for growth." And I remember my mom was like, "Well, then don't do it." I'd signed a contract, I'd signed shot 2 days. The next day, we signed a check, which was more than my remuneration at this point, of the 2 days of shoot to the producer. And I just walked out of the movie and I said, "I'm sorry, I can't work." And I've till date never worked with him. He's come to me with 3 other movies, and I don't even think he knows why, but it shaped me in such a big way in my head that I said, "I've never, ever, whatever I decide to be will be my choice. How I want to be perceived will be my choice. How you perceive me is how I will show you I want to be.
Please
Perception
recall
is
me.
reality, and my perception is going to be my
Thanks.
identity and my choice, whatever that might be. No one is the decision maker in my life, and it completely shaped me. There was a second time when
Fall back to safe zone.
I remember I started working in America, and I was sitting in this whole room of music producers that were trying to figure out like what to do with my sound, and everybody kept getting stuck on the word Bollywood, as if an Indian was me. She's an Indian artist. She's an Indian girl. Like every time somebody writes about me, even now, like people define me. I'm a very, very proud Indian, but my roots are not my identity. They don't
Please recall
define
me.
my ability have to have merit or to be the smartest person in the room or to be the one who breaks the glass ceiling. It's something I'm proud of. But it started defining and diminishing what my ability to be was. And they kept, and, like, I'm always written as the Indian actress, blah, 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 does, walked out of her apartment sashaying in the silver dress. But it's the Indian
Awesome.
actress. I mean, Would they do that with anyone else? Would you be the American Moira Forbes? Like, would you like?
I'm not sashaying out of my apartment in any silver outfit like that, so
But you know what I'm
I would
saying?
run toward that, but for different reasons.
Please recall me.
But you do get bucketed,
I
right?
always got stereotyped and like put into that box that oh I can only be the exotic beautiful girl. I can only be the engineer or whatever the stereotypes of people's heads were. But that was something that I wanted to break, and that really diminished my spirit for a little while. I told myself that and I was not cast in things, in projects because of that, because it was my limitation that I came from an industry which is very different. But I made that my asset because then I become a triple threat. I can dance, sing, and act.
That is a triple and sachet.
And sachet and silver drops.
And I want to turn to you because that you get put in this bucket, and you really were a barrier breaker in this country as the first, one of the first female CEOs to run an organization at scale, an Indian woman to do so, which was also notable. And there haven't been that many women after you. And so there are buckets, whenever we talk about sometimes female CEOs, we talk about them through a gender lens. Questions that we wouldn't ask male CEOs, similar to what you mentioned, male actors, we do ask female CEOs, but there are different realities. And you mentioned earlier some of the trade-offs that are required when you do have very intense professional ambitions. And I think you've been really, I'm very grateful because you've had very candid conversations around the challenges of navigating both career and family. You've said that quote, women cannot have it all, and the biological clock and the career clock are in total conflict with one another, total conflict. And in your life, you said you haven't had regrets, but you've had heartaches in reference to what that's meant for your daughters and your family. Talk a little bit about that. And is there another path? Are we being unrealistic when we uphold female CEOs and ask them to run the world, but when they also take a traditional path sometimes around motherhood, they get judged and there's backlash?
Look, any way you look at it, motherhood is a full-time job, especially when your kids are babies. Being an executive is a full-time job. Being a wife is a quasi full-time-ish job.
Does your husband even think it's a job? Like, does he makes
my
time on the
point of
radar
view. I'm
screen,
not
so that's
speaking
good.
for my husband. And in today's world, when you have aging parents, especially for daughters, that's also a responsibility. I'm not saying it's a job. It's a labor of love, but a responsibility. There's only 24 hours in a day. Be a parent, be an executive, be a daughter. In the Indian case, also daughter-in-law. Okay, and somehow find time for yourself. How do you make that happen? So there are trade-offs you make all the time, and in one way, I think all of us women have been told we can do everything. We've been given hopes and dreams and the education, and then we have these other issues.
Please recall
How
me.
do we juggle all of this? If companies, communities, societies don't come together to help us, how are we going to grow the population of the country? So I think it's very important that we all understand that if you struggle with these choices, you're not crazy. You are human. What we have to do in companies is give you an infrastructure in the company to allow you to have a family, men and women, and allow you to come to work, but bring the two together by having near-site or on-site daycare like we do at PepsiCo. And as you progress into the middle management levels where you have to work even harder, because remember it's a pyramid, it keeps getting narrow. And you have to work even harder than everybody else to sort of rise to the top. When your kids are teenagers, they need you even more. We have to make sure that we increase the skills to you. That's where all the unconscious bias comes in companies. That's where you struggle with people rolling their eyes when you're talking. All of that stuff happens. We have to make sure that your life at work is made easier because you're
It could be made easier though, but it still comes
and women today go through the heartaches, but whatever happens, women go through it a lot more because, I don't know about you guys. When my kids were small, anything they missed at home, even if dad wasn't home, they say, Mom will be in the office. Please, your dad's in his office. Can you go call him? He's right there. Mom, you tell us. And then the worst is when the dad calls you and say, where's my shirt? Do you have that? It's in the cupboard.
And
No, it's not in the cupboard. It's 6 inches. You got that too?
Indra, I have to
Why
say,
did you just move the head 6 inches?
my husband's in the room, so I really like this.
You
Please,
can't-
I'm happy you're saying this.
Oh, okay.
I say this to him all the time, so I feel much
It's
better that
6
Indra
inches to
is
the
saying
right.
this because
Why
we
did
don't
you
take it
move it 6
seriously.
inches? I didn't move it, you moved it. But it doesn't matter. For the sake of harmony, you go, yeah, I did it. I'm not going to argue. I am not going to argue. My daughters will say, Mom, stand up for your rights. Why? Why? It's not worth it.
Well, it's a losing battle.
That's the
Got married. Pick your battles.
Pick your
Check.
battles.
Yeah, no.
Got it.
Just say he's the best.
Even better. You're the best, honey.
Absolutely.
There
Hey,
you
you
go.
say that to my husband too, so don't give me this.
I do say that to you.
I'm taking notes, Indra. I'm taking
Just
notes.
keep saying
Copious
you're the
notes.
best.
You're the best.
It works.
You're the best.
Well,
But that's
you
a
know,
lot of, that's a
painful,
lot of
the trade-offs.
But that's a lot of pressure, though, right? Because
Sure.
you have to uplift your husband, kids, children, sit down with employees. That doesn't alleviate. That doesn't. Not that's a number. That's a real big number. But that doesn't leave a lot of time for you. So how do you not let sort of the threads come undone?
See, that's people have often asked, do you have time for yourself? But when I worry about my husband, there's time for myself because this is my husband. When I worry about my kids, I'm worrying about myself because it's my kids. It's my mother. It's my in-law. So I don't have time to sort of sit around and spa for hours. But if I took my kids, my daughters, remember, if I took them with me to the spa, we have together time. And if you can convince your husband to come for a pedicure with you, that's together time. You gotta figure out unnatural situations to be together. Because otherwise, there is no time. Unfortunately, there's only 24 hours in a day. You have to stretch it. Yes, you have time for yourself. Stuff that you like to do when you want to hang around with your own girlfriends. You don't have the time. But fun, you can do it.
So I have a few questions before we wrap up. But I think earlier today that the past 18 months have been this watershed moment in time for women around talking about inequities with a new sense of urgency and commitment and the like, which has been good, and that they're bringing it to the surface. You two represent different generations and different vantage points around these issues. And even the word Priyanka, you call yourself a feminist. You embrace that term. I would love for you to each sort of talk about how you think about what's going on, and that notion of feminism today, and Indra also, how it's evolved over the course of your career. I'll start with you, Priyanka.
I think growing up was conflicted about feminism. I didn't understand what the word meant, like a lot of us don't still. It took me a little time to understand what it means. Now, feminism is different to everyone. To me, what feminism stands for is give me the ability to make my own decisions without judging me. Just the same kind of freedom men have had for such a long time. Women should sound like this. Women should wear this. Women at this point should get married. We're always told what we should do. We need to be able to decide what we should do, whatever that is. So to me, that freedom is feminism. Second, I think that growing up, the one thing that looking back now, what I realized was for such a long time, we've always been told as women that the best one will get the boy, or the best one will get the job. And we sort of have been conditioned to push each other out of the way so that we can be the better one. And if we empower another woman, right? If I empower a woman who's sitting next to me, I might lose the opportunity. It's conditioning. And we've been conditioned to be that way. This is the first time in a very long time, at least in my lifetime, that I have seen women embracing each other, women empowering each other, women standing up for each other. And that is such a critical time. When women fought before us, generations before us, for us to have the ability to vote, we don't even think about it today sitting in this room. Think about what all they went through. So what we're doing today is we're seeding the thought for your daughters, for my daughter's daughters, for kids who will not have to think about the gender disparity. They'll not have to think about like how it feels to be a woman who's marginalized, or what it feels like to be traumatized by men. They won't have to think about it because we will create a world where men are afraid to do that. We will create a world together where we stand by each other and say, no, I'm sorry, you're not doing this to my daughter because you did it to me, and that's enough. And that is such a powerful time to be.
And you have that unique vantage point, right? Generationally, and given the world that you're in, and then this amazing perspective to see the opportunity that exists. And during given your career, how do you approach this conversation? And what Priyanka mentioned, and the optimism that we all have in terms of being able to move the momentum forward.
I look at the next couple of decades and say it's a decade of women. Because if I look at college degrees, women are getting it in larger numbers than men. If I look at the top grades, more women are getting the top grades than the men. So if you really want to run a successful company, you have to recruit the best and the brightest, i.e., bring the women into the company. So we have to create new companies, new environments to make women thrive. Because if you hire them and then they leave you, it's more expensive than not hiring them in the first place. So I'm a firm believer that the next couple of decades are the decades of women when it comes to working. But you can't put all the onus on women. We have to create the support structures to allow them to balance the different roles they have to play. Because there are some roles you cannot delegate to men. We have to do it ourselves. And so I think it behooves companies to help women achieve their goals. And to Priyanka's point, I think we have to have our own sisterhood. I've been telling the story recently. About 3 months ago, on my HBO popped up an episode of Sex and the City. I'd never watched it. So
You're
I sort of
missing
fell in
out. You're
love with
missing
the
out,
first
Indra.
episode, and I watched all 94 episodes. I binge watched it. I binge watched it. And I have to tell
Did
you.
your husband watch it with you? Was it
What?
one of the? Did your husband
No,
watch
no,
it with
no,
you?
no,
Was it
not
one
a
of the shared
chance.
activities?
No. The great thing about that show is because there's so many scenes that focus on the first word as opposed to the other three words, you can fast forward, which is what I did. So, but I love the show. Why did I love the show? Every episode had a lesson, an interesting thing to think about. But the biggest takeaway was the sisterhood of those four women.
Please recall
Carrie,
me.
Charlotte, Miranda, and who was the
Got
fourth
it.
one? Samantha. God, the sisterhood they had was fantastic. What was? Why don't we have sisterhood? Somebody shutting off my mic because you want me to talk about. But why don't we have our own sisterhood? I think the more I looked at that show, I said, man, we have to create our own sisterhoods. We have to have our own safe spot where we can talk about our issues. Because you can't talk about it at home, because nobody wants to hear you talk about your work problems at home. We need our sisterhood. We need an environment where our sisterhood does not judge us, but gives us constructive feedback, where we can talk about Mr. Big in a comfortable place. You know what I mean? For those of you who have seen the show, but I have to tell you that show profoundly altered my thinking only because I didn't think about the show and the fashions, which were awesome, but really about what was behind the covers, the sisterhood of women. So the only way we're going to be able to balance everything going forward is if we don't do what Priyanka talked about. Worry that the person next to us, the woman next to us, is going to take away our future potential because the next level is going to have fewer women. When we have a quota for women on the top. So let's pull us all, let's pull ourselves, each other, and that sisterhood needs to form. And when we get there, I think there's no stopping us.
I love that sentiment. I love Well, I have I have two questions to wrap up before we finish the conversation. Each of you have broken barriers. Each of you serve as incredible role models around the world. I would love for each of you to reflect on what the other woman on the stage represents in terms of opportunities for women. Priyanka, how do you see the work that Indra has done as a role model for your generation and what it means? And Indra, I would ask the same question to you.
I mean, there's really the one similarity between both Indra and I are we come from small towns and we had big dreams and we didn't let anything else define that. And that's why she's someone I'm a huge fan of, not because, she's the boss lady of how many employees you said?
How many 260?
What?
How many employees for PepsiCo?
260,000.
Yeah,
Just a few.
I want to be the boss
Quarter
lady for
billion,
that many
you know.
employees. But not because of that, but because of what she stands for as a woman. She's a proud woman who's an achiever, who but that doesn't define her when she walks into a room. She doesn't walk into a room like a lot of male CEOs do, where you can tell by the sniff of their cologne how much of a CEO they are.
And the hair gel, and the hair gel
and the
too.
gel and the suit.
Yeah.
But Indra walks in, like I said, not just because of her brains, but for me, as a girl who wants to be the biggest that I can be in whatever field that might be, she stands for integrity. She stands for being so self-assured that anything is like water off of a duck's back. She has this grace and charm and humor that she lives her life with. She's a mom. She's a daughter. She's a wife, and she does all of that. I mean, I went for lunch to her house and she cooked. She cooked. I mean, I can't cook, so I really admire that about women. And she cooked like from scratch. It was Indian food, and like she's completely wholesome. And I think when as I'm growing up and see myself going forward in my life, I would want to be a wholesome woman, and that's what I admire her for. As a wholesome woman.
And what would you say about Priyanka?
I'm smelling my cologne first.
We know she can't cook, so you can't
I gotta
you
I
can't
gotta
say
get
that.
this cologne. But
I think you will.
I don't you got it. I don't think anybody comprehends how big a figure Priyanka is in India. I mean, she's not normal. She's like awesome. When she walks in the street, she'll get mobbed. When she lands at the airport, there are hundreds of people clamoring to see her. She's like hot stuff. And so, the amazing part about Priyanka is not only is she a fabulous actress, a fabulous dancer, a fabulous musician. I'm sure many of you have never seen Bollywood films, but when you see her in one, it is spectacular. Most of her movies are like gross